Today's episode, we have Imam Dawud Walid. Dawud Walid is currently the executive director of the Michigan chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations, otherwise known as CARE, which is a chapter of America's largest advocacy and civil liberties organization for American Muslims and a member of the Michigan Muslim Community Council Imams Committee. Sheikh Dawud Walid has lectured at over 70 institutions of higher learning in North America and abroad about Islam and social justice, including at Harvard University, the University of the Virgin Islands, St. Thomas and St. Croix campuses, and the University of Bamako in Mali, as well as spoken at the 2008 and 2011 Congressional Black Caucus conventions alongside prominent speakers such as the Reverend Jesse Jackson and Congressman Keith Ellison. He previously served as an imam at Masjid Wadi Muhammad in Detroit and the Boston American Islamic Center in Hamtramck, Michigan, and continues to deliver sermons and lectures at Islamic centers across the United States and Canada. He's also the co-author of the book Centering Black Narratives, Black Muslim Nobles Among the Early Pious Muslims. He was a 2011 to 2012 fellow of the University of Southern California USC American Muslim Civil Leadership Institute, and a 2014 to 2015 fellow of the Wayne State Law School Detroit Action Equity Lab. Sheikh Dawud Walid has also served in the United States Navy under honorable conditions, earning 2 United States Navy and Marine Corps achievement medals while deployed abroad. He has also received awards of recognition from the city councils of Detroit and Hamtramck, and from the mayor of Lansing, as well as a number of religious and community organizations. He is also the author of the best-selling Sacred Activism, which we'll speak about in this episode. Assalamu alaikum, Imam Dawud. How are you?
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. I'm well, alhamdulillah. How are you?
Alhamdulillah. So just to start off this episode, we want to ask you the question of how did you come to the faith of Islam?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Well, the easy answer to that for everyone who's Muslim is through the hidayah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that all of us who have declared Shahadatain, it was only through the gift of divine guidance from Almighty Allah. So my background is that my parents are not both Muslims. Actually, my mother's Christian. My father, he grew up going to high school back in the days of the Nation of Islam in Detroit, across from Temple Number 1. Later, before that masjid, that temple became a masjid, Sunni Islam. And so my parents got married, and when I was born, a few years after I was conceived, they got divorced. My mother moved down to Virginia. And so I only have Muslims on my father's side of the family, but I was raised by my mother's family and her, who are 100% Christian. I was sent to Sunday school and the church activities. And around the age of 14, I refused to go to church anymore. I always had a problem with the idea of Trinity and seeing the picture of Jesus looking like someone Nordic or from Sweden. And it was through the Black conscious hip hop movement of the late 80s, which actually was my bridge to reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, which then led me to read a book about the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as well as the early Khulafa. May Allah be well pleased with them. And it was through rap music of the late 80s and early 90s that had, we could say, Muslim tropes, and many Muslims who were Muslim or involved in proto-Islamic movements, which was my bridge into the deen. So alhamdulillah, that was 3 decades ago that transition took place.
Inshallah. So in the beginning is of when you convert to Islam, um, were there any difficulties that you experienced, or any cultural changes that you had to get used to, or anything like that?
So cultural, no. And, I never ate pork. So
Okay,
even when my mother was carrying me, my father was adamant that, that she didn't eat pork, and he never brought pork in the house. So my mother carried me. She never ate pork. Even moving into Virginia, I basically, had stayed away from pork. So the dietary issues really weren't a challenge. Um, for me, it was a challenge or a struggle to be able to make my 5 daily prayers on time. I think was the biggest struggle. But my mother's side of the family didn't really give me any problems. At that time, in the late 80s and the beginning of the early 90s, long before 9/11, it was actually seen as cool to be a Muslim in the African American community, right? And of course, this has to do with historical reasons about Muhammad Ali and Malcolm X still being very popular in Black America, but also the influence of early hip hop movement. So I didn't face any Islamophobia or any real hatred towards me for being Muslim.
you kind of pointed out one of the theological things that you didn't really agree with in Christianity was how Jesus was portrayed at Islam as this Nordic, or this white figure. Um, did you also start thinking about um, just him being portrayed in general, or him being seen as this divine figure? Was that also a source of discomfort for you at the time?
Yeah, so the main discomfort was portraying God as a man. Him looking Nordic was secondary for sure. I
Gotcha.
never believed the Nation of Islam theology either. As a young person, I had read Malcolm X's journey, and I had also read Elijah Muhammad's book, Message to the Black Man. I listened to Farrakhan's talk, and I could neither accept the whole thing about a Farad Muhammad, some Desi guy who's supposed to have been Allah the person. So whether it wasn't really a racial thing, it was the whole idea of thinking that God could be a man that's confined to a location, or that, this whole idea about Jesus allegedly being crucified on the cross, that, that men who were created could crucify God, or that Farad Muhammad got put in jail so you can lock up God and put God in jail. Like, to me, it was all ludicrous. Even as a young person, once I started thinking about it, maybe in late elementary school or beginning of middle school, it just sounded ridiculous. I believe in God. I didn't believe in God being a man. But the whole Nordic thing kind of threw me off, and especially when listening to Malcolm, even after like his transition and being a Sunni, but how Christianity was used to subjugate enslaved Africans, and even forced conversion to Christianity, and those enslaved Africans be given a picture of a man who looked like their slave master that they had to worship. So I was also aware that, that picture of Jesus in particular looking like, someone from Sweden or, Britain, was dangerous because it bred inferiority complexes into my people.
Um, so you mentioned the NOI, Agreed Nation of Islam. Did you know people that were part of Nation of Islam during this period of time, and did you speak to them about these beliefs? And I'm kind of curious, like, um, how that community was like during the early 90s.
So I didn't really interact with Nation people too much. There were a couple of Nation people in my high school, and I had a cousin who was in the Nation, and we would agree to disagree. But the Nation of Islam at that time, and then years later, like I had already been Muslim, but years later, Mr. Farrakhan had the Million Man March, and to me, the Nation of Islam was more of a social reform movement than actually something with any like real religious value. So I could always appreciate the social reform message about um, you know black folks being more moral, um, you know uh, doing something for ourselves, not asking or depending on white people for help. Um, I saw that as empowering parts of messages of the Nation of Islam outside of their heterodox theology about God being a man, or the idea that some spaceship called the mothership or the mother plane was going to come and get black people, and when America gets destroyed by Allah, and then the spaceship's going to take black people to Mecca, and then Allah's going to teach black people to speak Arabic at a twinkling of an eye. Like, I didn't believe any of that uh, mythology, but nonetheless, there was, I had respect for the Nation as a social reform movement, and I still do, to this day, more so the old Nation of Islam, not its contemporary iteration.
So in the beginning stages, when you were fully embracing Orthodox Islam, how did you seek out more knowledge, and how did you um, try to find a greater community of people? Well, you said that from your father's side, right? But I guess my question is more towards how did you seek more knowledge in regards to your belief?
Okay, so I knew intrinsically that the Bible, without being told, I figured out the Bible wasn't the original Bible and had been tampered with. So as a teenager, I wanted to study Arabic language so I could read what God was saying to me. Like, I know that, Isa alayhi salam didn't speak Greek, and the oldest, manuscript of the so-called New Testament was in Greek, which was then translated into Latin to then like the King James version. It's like I knew that wasn't like authentic, even without like the tampering, right? So I sought out to get Arabic classes, and then without knowing the actual title of a spiritual guide, a Murabbi, I end up getting a man, may Allah have mercy upon him, Sheikh Salim, who had studied Arabic formally, and he took me under his wing. So that's when I started to study grammar, and then books like Tuhfat al-Saniya, which is a commentary on the introduction of Al-Ajrumiyya, which is a foundational text in Arabic language, and then started studying from there, and then also learning from teachers abroad. So that's kind of like how my study went, but it started off with wanting to learn how to read Arabic to access the Quran for myself.
I wonder if you've ever heard of the term convert care. So that's something we really try to emphasize. I relate the importance of convert care. How did convert care during the beginning stages of when embracing Islam, how did that impact your experience, or even the lack thereof? How did that impact your experience?
Well, it was important for me because this man, Sheikh Salim, who was like my Murabbi, my spiritual mentor, I would spend a lot of time with him. and he was very generous in his time with me, to the extent that I probably would spend time with him like 6 days a week. So I would attend his Arabic class and get private lessons, but I would come to the masjid and pray with him. He'd take me with him just to get a sandwich. I would go with him riding down to the halal meat market. He took me with him, sometimes going out of town to meet other imams and for lectures, like in other states. So I had like a one-on-one type of relationship with my murabbi. And I think really this is something that's traditional that needs to be resurrected. The Sahaba, may Allah be well pleased with them, they had, I guess we could say, two types of convert care in a sense. I mean, because all the Sahaba, except the ones who were born into the deen later on, but all of the original Sahaba, these were converts. Well, of course, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that was the Murabbi. He was a spiritual guide for all the Sahaba. And then I guess the second point would be is that in Medina, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he paired off people and made them best friends. We can say it's called a mu'akhad, from the Muhajirin and Ansar. And so, new people who were newer to Islam were paired off with people who had been older in Islam. And so I think that when we're talking about this convert care, the first generation is the best generation of Muslims. That's the best generation to look at as far as this issue of convert care.
So you would say the most important thing for a new Muslim to find is a mentor and a spiritual guide?
I think that's the number one issue, is for someone to have a mentor and a teacher. So it's for moral support and to learn, Islamic etiquettes, or what we would say is adab. And then also to learn and get the basic rudimentary knowledge, or that which is the obligatory knowledge that all Muslims are supposed to know, fard ayn, that should be gotten through a spiritual guide. I most definitely believe in that. And again, this is something that has been lost. And this just doesn't go for converts. This goes for people who are born and raised in Muslim families. They need a spiritual guide as well, or a spiritual mentorship.
What qualities should a spiritual guide or mentor have that new Muslims should look for? Like Sheikh Salim, as you mentioned, what sort of you said that you went out to get a stand with him. What sort of things about him made you want to embrace him as a mentor?
Well, he was the one that embraced me after I came. So it's not the job of the teacher to fish students. The student, or the talib, or the seeker, the salik, is the one that looks for the guide. And that's literally relates to what these words mean in the Arabic language. Even if one cannot find a scholar to be a spiritual mentor, the person should, number one, be salih. It should be someone that you see, at least outwardly, that is upright, and a person who not only in their character, in their behaviors, is also someone who at least has the basic fundamentals of Islam that they know, starting with the basic creed of Islam, those things that are, well, I say, Hadith Jibreel, we can say, narrated by Abu Hurairah, it contains the basics of what a Muslim must know to be a proper Muslim. And, it's better if someone can find a scholar, but just for a basic spiritual mentor in the very beginning, if a qualified scholar is not around who has knowledge, and by knowledge, I just don't mean knowledge that's memorized. When we're talking about true knowledge, as Imam Shafi mentioned, rahmatullahi alayhi, that knowledge is not simply that which is memorized, but knowledge is that which is beneficial. It's what's acted upon. It's embodied, right? Those are the people who are the primary and the best spiritual mentors, who have ijaza, who have studied and they've been given permission, and they have a chain of transmission that goes back unbroken from their teachers to their teachers, their teachers, their teachers, going back to the first early generations of Muslims. This is what's optimal.
So Imam, you yourself as a community leader, you of course had experiences with new Muslims. What sort of things do you notice that converts need the most as a community leader?
So I think what the convert needs the most isn't a cookie cutter thing, right? Some converts convert to Islam and are disowned by their families. Some converts need something very basic as maybe somewhere to stay. They may need some financial help. And this is actually one of the categories of those people who are eligible for zakat, right? Zakat should be going towards convert care. And especially those who are in dire straits, these are people who are eligible for zakat. And there's no shame in them taking that. And that should be explained, and there should be no hesitancy in the community giving it. So that's for one group of people. For some group of people, it is also they're feeling isolated, because when they come into Islam and they're going to sermons and they maybe hear that much of their previous social life is forbidden for them as a Muslim. So to then invite these converts into social gatherings that are halal and tayyib, those things in which lawful activity is going on that's wholesome, because socialization or feelings of isolation, I should say, is the number one reason why a lot of people who convert to Islam leave Islam. Is not because of lack of knowledge per se, it's this state of like feeling lonely and disconnected, and people have real human and emotional needs to have a place of belonging. Two other things I think are very important: the didactical aspect, where people who are new Muslims maybe don't have that sense of needing to be around a lot of people, and they don't have financial issues, but the initial teaching of the very basic principles of Islam, starting with Tawheed, in a very clear, practical way, before even teaching Salah, and going into like rules, like 50 rules, ahkam. That is something that needs to be taught to all Muslims in general and converts, and there's a particular methodology about doing that, and not flooding a new Muslim with all sorts of finer intricacies of fiqh. Like, that's a problem. And then also the other thing is that for some converts, once they've gotten their feet wet, the trying to find a way, if they're able to get married for the men folk, and for the women folk, if they are of marriage age, is to help pairing them off with someone who is righteous to get married, because many times converts have problems getting married. I know of a brother, mashallah, very sincere. It took him quite a while to get married. He converted from Hinduism, and he wanted to get married, and simply being put, many parents didn't want their daughters to marry a Hindu convert, even though as a new Muslim began to learn his deen, he probably was practicing more Islam and making Fajr prayer every morning in the masjid than most Muslims who were born and raised in the deen. But this guy had a problem getting married. And that's an issue that we have to deal with when we're talking about converts.
So Imam, you mentioned a good amount of issues that converts face these days, and I guess that ties in with the next topic that we do kind of want to talk about. And one of your specialties is actually the concept of sacred activism. So Imam, if you could just define what sacred activism is, and how does it differ from the activism that we're used to seeing?
Well, the activism is to be, and I hate to define a term I used to, but being active in working and serving to help promote that which is already good in society or a good cause, and at the same time to try to inhibit or to place barriers in front of those things in society and the world that are causing harm to people as well as God's creation, right? So there's many forms of activism, right, that based upon niche issues. But the difference between activism that is profane or secular and that which is sacred is that activism which is sacred recognizes that there's a creator, and that the creator is the one who sets boundaries of what's right and wrong, and what's recommended and what is not recommended. And that in this activism, striving to promote what's good and forbid what's evil, it is God and his messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they are the ones who define the parameters of good and evil, and working within those parameters. And then activism, which is sacred, also the ends don't justify the means, that the objective has to be wholesome and good within the sacred law. The intention of going towards objective should be done for the pleasure of God, and the means, which includes the adab, the mannerisms, the etiquettes, should also strive towards spiritual excellence and not go outside of the akhlaq and the character of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because he said, "I was sent but to perfect noble traits of character." Makarimul akhlaq is what he said. So that's sacred. That would be sacred activism. That activism, which is outside of sacred, people will just say, well, the ends justify the means, or maybe they will label something as a justice issue. Then, in fact, it could be something that's prohibited according to the sacred law. But in these days and times, I think many Muslims have taken a postmodern worldview, or even been influenced by neo-Marxism, and how they view activism both in issues as well as in methods. So this is why I wrote the book Towards Sacred Activism to begin with, because being with one foot with the students of knowledge and another foot in the activism world, I saw how much of the activism in the American Muslim community was really causing more long-term detriment than benefit for our community.
Use the term neo-Marxist, and I know Jordan Peterson loves to use this term a lot, but I don't really know if I fully understand what is meant by that. So Imam, can you just define what it means to live in this neo-Marxist world?
Well, we have the original Marxists, and we know that Marx and Engels and what they wrote, the Communist Manifesto, but the whole issue of Marxism, which is a material-based philosophy, and it sets up this dynamic, or this paradigm, that people within power and authority are inherently evil, and this idea about the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat. That basically you have people who have money and they're in power, and that these people need to be toppled so that we can have a utopian world. And then neo-Marxism is a revival or a remix of that. And we have certain social theories that come out of Marxism, which are neo-Marxist. Critical theory comes out of critical theory, and its sanad comes from neo-Marxism, critical theory. So I remember I mentioned the word sanad. Everyone has a sanad, or a chain of transmission, whether they realize it or not. If that chain of transmission isn't going back to the Prophet's family and to the Sahaba, then it's going back to other people. It could be going to Foucault. It could be going to Marx or Engels. And so critical theory, which comes out of this tradition, this is then where you get the likes of critical race theory comes out of this. And then you also have critical gender studies, which then we also have postmodernism, which is this idea that there is no such thing as objective truth. It's the era of post-truth. Everything is subjective, and then all hierarchy should be torn down, which includes that, you can tear down not only so-called patriarchy, but then, what it means to be a male is up for debate. Or people don't have to even be a male or female. They can be just a them or a they. Or maybe we take it a step further. A person can be a trans wolf or a trans feline, right? So this is what I'm talking about. But much of this has roots back to a materialistic-based approach about life, in which there are no respect for or factoring in that behind all physical manifestations of metaphysical reality. So this is how people of faith view things, that they view things first, that there's the unseen that manifests into the seen, whereas Marxism and neo-Marxism is just material-based, right? It's a material-based analysis with material-based solutions. And then therefore any theory of change that is based in neo-Marxism is going to be either deficient in its addressing societal ills, or it's going to actually it could add on to problems or create new problems.
So in the field of activism that we have right now, that's defined by a lot of the ideologies that you just went over, neo-Marxism, postmodernism. What advice do you have for Muslims that are in that field, that love advocating for marginalized communities, that want to stand up for justice? How can they honorably be an activist in today's climate?
I have two pieces of advice. The first is, this is a principle. It's the Islamic principle, and it is not permissible for anyone to proceed in endeavor until they learn or know the ruling of Allah pertaining to it. Again, it is impermissible for anyone to proceed in a matter or an endeavor until they know the ruling of Allah pertaining to it. So one must be educated and to know the standards of good and bad, and then also to know the ruling in regards to the specific issue based upon the Quran, based upon the authenticated Sunnah, and also factoring in if the issue relates to ijma, or the consensus of what the righteous of this ummah have always agreed upon regarding our ethical and moral code, right? So if a Muslim is unsure about that, then the baseline is to not be involved in activism until they get Islamically educated first, before even knowing the points about the issue, right? Because in the name of trying to correct the wrong, we can do harm in the name of doing good. And there's no tawfiq, and there's no khair that's going to come long-term from any endeavor, social, political endeavor, or social economic endeavor, in which people think that they're advocating for something or against the injustice and violating the sacred law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And I've seen this, by the way, play out in some activism around the issue of Palestine in particular. People making major mistakes, which is not going to bring long-term good to the Palestinian people. The other issue is Yahya ibn Mu'adh al-Razi, rahmatullahi ta'ala, he said, if you cannot bring benefit, then do no harm. So everyone doesn't need to be an activist. There's different ways to support issues, right? It doesn't mean that you have to actually have your feet on the ground, but everyone doesn't need to be on the streets or organizing. That's not for everyone. If you're unclear about issues, it's okay to sit it out. Like, you don't have to even have to like a Facebook status or share something on Instagram. But let's say that you do. You have been educated on the issue, both Islamically as well as the actual issues on the ground. So there's text and context. If I can just keep it simple like that. There's the text, which is the religious authority, and the context, the issue that's going on the ground. Then people can, most importantly, make dua that Allah helps bring about goodness and stops the oppressors from oppressing. I mean, dua is the most important. Dua salahu mu'min. Dua is the weapon of the believer. And then also giving moral and monetary support to causes that are good, that comply with the sacred law. So those are the two major pieces of advice that I have. There has to be some study and some Islamic grounding. And I would say to those people who see activists and organizers running around that activists or organizers who themselves aren't coming from a particular Islamic grounding or background, and they're out in the streets or leading protests or doing this and doing that. Just because they're popular doesn't mean that they are worthy of your support. You pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides them, but this isn't the person that you give money to them or invite them to your masjid or give them like the main stage at your convention. No, because some of these people who are involved in activism as well as politicians, they are literally promoting el munkar, like they're doing el amr bil munkar. They are promoting that or celebrating that which Allah and His Messenger have cursed and made forbidden. So what good is that going to be for the dawah of Islam or for the younger generation to reduce being Muslim to some sort of like identity, like Muslimness, like Muslim is some sort of ethnic, social, political identity, when being Muslim is based in Istislam. Muslim is one who is involved in Istislam, means who seeks to willfully submit lovingly to God, right, to Allah. Like Haqiqatul Islam Istislam, as Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani Hanbali said, that the reality of Islam and being a Muslim is willful submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's loving willful submission, right? So any Muslim who's promoting the opposite of submission, which is submitting to their own egos, their own desires, which is disobedience to Allah, then those people shouldn't be supported. And we pray for them and allow them to come to the masjid to pray, but they shouldn't be given the microphone.
So, Imam, and along with so many issues that we see today with, Marxism and postmodernism, I see also a lot of talk of the crisis of manhood. And you kind of alluded to this, of how Muslim activists can fall into the pitfalls of validating a lot of the un-Islamic rhetoric that goes on in activist spheres of the evil of patriarchy, or men not even knowing that they're men. Could you speak a little bit about that? What is the definition of manhood, specifically Islamic manhood, and does it differ from all the perspectives of masculinity that we see today?
So firstly, let's be clear about the outward before the inward. So all males are not men, right? All males are not men, but all men are males. And by male, we mean that Being a male is a divine construct. It's not something man-made. And there's a biological reality to it because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Ya ayyuhan nasu inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha. O humankind, surely we created you or we constructed you as a single male and single female. So Allah clearly says in the Quran that gender is a divine construct, not a man-made construct, that a male has XY chromosomes, right? And he has certain hormones that are secreted more than others. And he has a particular type of brain development that happens, for a man at a time, whereas women's brains develop differently in a different time period, right? Males don't have fallopian tubes. Males don't have a menstrual cycle, and it's mammary glands, right? Like how women do. So these are something clear as far as what it means to be a male, and then all males are men. Now, all men are males. Now, being a man, an honorable personage, or el murua, as it relates to being a man, that there also are inward aspects and qualities that then personify themselves or manifest themselves outwardly, right? So, and these traits are shared between males and females in sacredness, but how they play themselves out socially are different, because the sacred law mandates certain things for men, it doesn't mandate for women, and vice versa. Like going out to defend the community, or defending the ummah under the rightful authority, or to defend one's home and property. This is a religious obligation for the man, not a religious obligation for a woman. So how even something as ghaira, vigilant care, or projective jealousy, or how as a shaja'a, courage, how that looks different. It looks different socially. It's supposed to look different socially for a male, for a man, than for a woman. It's not the same. So there are certain traits that are built up inwardly within inside of a male, to make him to a respectable man. So to be a man, there's a certain level of gradualism comes that a male has to go through some of trial, some sort of hardship, some sort of rigor, in order to basically toughen him up or man him up. A male has to be put under some sort of responsibility in order to be a man, because in order to be a man, you have to be responsible, or qawama, or rijalu qawwamun 'ala nisa. That the better translation is husbands are the caretakers of their wives, but it says, we normally translate as men are the caretakers of women. But the caretakership or the wala is transferred for when a man or father has his daughter. He's turning over his being a caretaker. He's literally turning it over, his daughter is being caretaken over to her husband, right? So these responsibilities, according to the Sharia, the sacred law, must be understood. And there's a certain level of rigor and courage that has to be displayed by a real man, as well as other traits, self-discipline. A man can't be going off just acting off of his whims and off of his feelings. There's a time for a man to be stern, and there's a time for a man to be gentle. And we know that the best man is Al-Habib al-Mustafa Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described him as mercy to the world. So, مَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. So being compassionate is a quality of being a man, right? This is a quality of being a man. But in times of adversity or facing enemies, that's not the time to be soft, or the time to be, overly empathetic, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Muhammad Rasulullah waladhi ma'hu ashiddal al-kufar ruhamahu bainahum. Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and those who are with him are stern, resolute, and they are hard against disbelievers, while being merciful amongst themselves. So there's a time and place for everything. And those expectations, and this means in a time of conflict, these same expectations are not upon women folk. And women by nature, metaphysically, are more jamali than men, as natures of being mothers. Even if a woman can't be a mother biologically or never gets married, she's a mother at least in her potential, or at least in her inward disposition. She has that in her. Generally speaking, this is something that is like innate, and this is the balance between men and women, that women tend to be more merciful and more caring through their mother nature, whereas men are more jalali in their presence, of going out, being more bold, right? Being more stern and assertive. And part of the tragedy of our society is, besides the coddling of a lot of males who are, they're not going through, they're not given rigor, they're not put under discipline, they're given too much, not allowed to struggle. I call these mama's boys, so they're overly coddled. But then another problem is that because of radical feminism, women have been deceived and taught that equality means doing everything, having access to everything and doing everything that men do. And womanhood is what is a man to be equal to for a woman? And there's balance in the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said He created everything as zawjain, in mates, right? Masculine and feminine expressions. And the kamal, or the perfection of a woman, is not trying to do everything equal as a man, or having equal access to every single thing, because she can never be a man. Just like I can never be a woman. And this is part of the trick, or the deception, that women think that they need to be Miss Independent, and to be stern out in the world or in certain things of adversity, as men have been historically expected to throughout space and time. Not just Muslims, from Shinto societies in Japan, or Buddhism or Hinduism. There are certain things that have always been universal for the history of humankind, that people have decided they think they want to change in the last 55, 60 years. So we have to be clear, and this is why the Sharia, the sacred law, it's important to learn, if we were even to contemplate like our fiqh of like how women have menstrual cycles and we don't, how men never have an excuse not to make salah, while women have an excuse not to make salah. They never have to do qada when they're on their menstrual cycles. If we even contemplated some of these things, we wouldn't be so confused. But unfortunately, a lot of the brothers are confused, and unfortunately, many sisters are also confused.
Imam, I think some of the topics that we went over there are definitely much needed to ponder over. Just one final question to end up the podcast that we asked every single one of our guests. So our organization Relay seeks to empower converts, foreign Muslims, and the community as a whole through essential Islamic resources and content. We want to echo the saying of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Convey from me even a single verse." Relay is also inspired by the concept of a relay race, a team working together to complete a difficult task. How the baton is passed from each member to another member until all of you get to the finish line, right? So that's the image that we try to embody in our work, inshallah. So the question we want to ask you is, which Islamic figures would you, Imam Dawud, like to have on your relay race team? It can be specifically from a Dawah perspective, or it can be however you want to frame it. And it can be anyone from Islamic history, just not the Prophet of Islam or any of the companions.
Okay, so if normally there's a relay race, there's 4 people running the race. So if I were the last leg, then I have to pick 3 people. So if it's not someone from the companions, of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then I would say that in that the first person of the relay race would be one of the noble people from amongst the Tabi'een, whose name or nickname is Zainul Abidin, or this would be Ali ibn Hussein, who is the son, or excuse me, the grandson of Al Khalifatul Rashid Ali ibn Abi Talib. May Allah be well pleased with him. This was a man who spent much of his life after going to Medina being involved in dawah. He bought people who were enslaved and emancipated them, but he taught them the deen. So he bought people of freedom with the direct purpose of teaching them the deen so that they could go and transmit sacred knowledge, right? So that's a noble thing, freeing people from slavery and also teaching them sacred knowledge. This would be the first person. The second person is, I'm fast forwarding way up into Islamic history, but then I would say that the second person would be, if we go then about 400 years later, it would be Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani al-Hanbali, rahmatullahi alayhi, who helped lead a renaissance in the Islamic world, in which Muslims at the time were facing threats from Mongols, but also the Crusaders. And this is around a time where the Crusaders took back over, had taken over Jerusalem, and Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani was one of those people that helped raise up young lions, and he also taught Fatwa, and the generation after him, and the likes of Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi, these were the people that went on Ribat, and they later took Jerusalem back over. So the generation after his was that of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. So I would say Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani is the second person for the dawah. And from the American context, then it would be Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, Al-Azhari, rahmatullahi alayhi, who we also know as Malcolm X. Malcolm X would be the third person. I don't think that in the last century there's any person just simply from their autobiography has had more impact on influencing Muslims to come back to Islam and giving them dignity, and people picking that book up and converting to Islam. That probably is the most influential book. If not in the last century, we can say probably in the last 60 years is the autobiography of Malcolm X. That book and that man's story has probably done more for the dawah of Islam than I think probably of any other book in the last 60 years probably is that book. So those would be my three. Zainul Abidin Ali ibn Hussein ibn Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhum, Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani al-Hanbali radiallahu an, and then Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz Malcolm X rahmatullahi alayhi. That's my relay team.
MashaAllah, it's such a strong team. I love that question so much because everyone has very different answers from the next person. So again, Imam, Jazakallah khair for your time. I really appreciated the conversation. I know our viewers would really benefit from the topics that we touched on today, inshallah. Well, the episode is pretty much done. I just want to ask for forgiveness if I've said anything wrong or ask any weird questions throughout. I really want to ask you to make dua for our efforts, because we can't really do it without the dua there and your cooperation with us as well.
May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless this effort and have this effort be a means of strengthening the iman of the Muslims involved, the iman of the Muslims who watch, and for those who are not Muslims, may it be a bridge for them towards our beautiful community, our beautiful nation, the nation of Al-Habib, Al-Mustafa Muhammad, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi.
Um, Imam, Jazakallah khair for your time. Inshallah, we can maybe do another episode in the near future. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I hope you have an amazing day. Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.